The silence in the main conference room was heavy and suffocating. It was the terrified silence of 200 people holding their breath. I sat in the third row, hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee. I focused on the steam, knowing if I looked up, I would see the pity in the eyes of the junior developers I had hired. Standing at the podium was Martin Vance, CEO of Titan Industrial Systems, a man I once considered a friend. I had frozen in server rooms to ensure his company didn't lose a dime, but that friendship evaporated today. As part of our strategic vision, we are making necessary changes to our technology division, Martin said, his voice echoing. We need leadership that reflects the modern, agile nature of the marketplace. He paused, refusing to look at me. Effective immediately, Henry Evans will be transitioning out of his role as Senior IT Director. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. I felt a cold sweat break out. I was 48 years old and had been with this company since I was 24, fresh out of the military. I built this infrastructure from scratch. We thank Henry for his service, Martin continued. However, we need digital natives who understand cloud-first strategies. I finally looked up. Standing by the podium with a smug smirk was Julian Vance, Martin's 28-year-old son. Julian had been working here for 6 months as an IT strategy consultant. Everyone knew this wasn't a restructuring. It was a coronation. Please welcome Julian Vance as our new Director of Information Technology, Martin announced. Julian nodded like a politician. I felt a wave of nausea. Martin could have fired me privately. Instead, he chose this mandatory all-hands meeting to make a public example of me, signaling that loyalty meant nothing compared to bloodlines. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. 200 heads turned. I didn't say a word. I walked toward the back doors. As I pushed them open, Martin's voice faltered before resuming louder. The walk back to my office felt like a funeral procession. The fluorescent lights buzzed with a mocking hum. Reaching my office, Nancy Reed from HR was waiting, looking miserable. A security guard named Oliver stood by the door, unable to meet my eyes. "I'm so sorry, Henry," Nancy whispered. "They want you cleared in 30 minutes. I laughed bitterly. Standard protocol for security risk, I began packing. 24 years reduced to one cardboard box. The financial panic set in. My daughter Chloe had a year left of her master's program, costing $40,000 a year. My son Daniel was a medical resident drowning in loans. I had refinanced my mortgage 3 years ago after divorcing Susan. I desperately needed this job. I was exactly 7 years away from full retirement at 55. Martin knew that. He decided saving on my pension was worth ruining my future. Legally, they were playing with fire. The Age Discrimination in Employment Act protects workers over 40. Replacing a 48-year-old veteran with a 28-year-old son was a blatant violation. I made a mental note to speak with an employment lawyer about ADEA and possible Warren Act violations. "Henry, we need the laptop and phone," Nancy said softly. I handed them over. "And your security badge," she winced. I froze. The badge was an encrypted RFID key granting root access, but it was more than a key. 3 years ago, I wrote a dead man's switch for the admin accounts to prevent unauthorized breaches. The system verified my employment status. If changed to terminated, a script would trigger a total lockdown after a 72-hour safety delay. "I left it in my car," I lied smoothly. "I'll grab it on the way out." Nancy felt guilty and let it slide. "Just leave it at the front desk," she said. I finished packing and walked out to the parking garage. Sitting in my car, I gripped the steering wheel. "You forgot one thing, Martin," I whispered. "You threw away the only guy with the key. To understand why this betrayal cuts so deep, you have to understand what Titan Industrial Systems used to be. When I started at 24, it was just me and a mess of cables in a tiny closet. We had 4 slow computers and a jammed fax machine. I built everything. I ran cables through drop ceilings, inhaling fiberglass dust. I configured the first servers, sleeping on a cot to reboot them every 2 hours. I wrote the custom scripts integrating our inventory with the manufacturing floor, code still running deep in the system today. I remembered the ice storm of 2014 when the power grid failed. I drove 40 treacherous miles, siphoned gas from my truck for generators, and stayed 3 days cycling cooling fans so databases wouldn't overheat. Martin cried that day, hugged me, and handed me a Distinguished Service Award. "As long as Henry Evans is here, this company is safe," he had said. Apparently, safety wasn't the priority anymore. Modernization was, embodied by Julian Vance. I tried to be nice when the 28-year-old showed up 6 months ago in slim fit suits. I thought the boss's son wanted to learn, but Julian only wanted to pontificate. He interrupted meetings with ridiculous questions about leveraging blockchain for supply chain latency. I explained latency was a network issue, not blockchain. He just dismissed me, demanding everything move to the cloud. He ignored legal compliance, once trying to mandate pirated analytics software. I warned him that under 17 U.S.C. Section 106, unauthorized reproduction of copyrighted software carries massive federal penalties. It was a clear breach of fiduciary duty, but Martin ignored my warnings. The first 24 hours of forced unemployment are a strange purgatory. On Tuesday morning, I sat at my kitchen table, my brain running through IT tasks no longer mine. I should have been reviewing backup reports. Instead, I updated my profile. Henry Evans, Senior IT Director, 24 years experience. I knew I had a potential Age Discrimination in Employment Act lawsuit, but lawsuits take years. I needed to see this play out now. I texted Gary from procurement. We met at a dive bar at 6 p.m. Gary looked exhausted, ordering a large pitcher. "It's a madhouse, Henry," Gary said. Julian spent the morning wondering why his email signature wasn't syncing and asked for the Wi-Fi password. I took a sip of beer. "And the Apex Automotive presentation?" I asked. Gary's face darkened. "That's the big one. Martin is manic, betting everything on this $25,000 contract. The Apex executives come in Thursday. Julian is supposed to run the live tech demo, but he's clueless. I saw him typing your old login. He thinks the sticky note with admin 123 is the master password." Gary looked at me sharply. "Henry, you didn't leave anything behind, did you?" I looked my friend in the eye. "I left exactly what I built. Gary, a system requiring a competent administrator." On Wednesday afternoon, one day before the disaster, my phone rang. I finally answered. "Henry, it's Julian," the voice said, lacking his usual arrogant bluster. "Hello, Julian," I said casually. "Did you lose the Wi-Fi password again?" There was an uncomfortable pause. "We have a small issue. I'm trying to access the Apex project files on the secure drive, but it's empty. My dad is freaking out." "Did you delete them?" "I didn't delete anything, Julian," I replied calmly. "Those files are encrypted for security compliance. You need to physically mount the drive using the master encryption key." "What key? Just tell me the code," he demanded. "I cannot do that, Julian," I said slowly. "I do not work for Titan Industrial Systems anymore. Giving you that code violates my strict non-disclosure agreement. It would be a major corporate liability, total separation of access." "Henry, please," he whined. "Dad is going to kill me." "I can't help you," I said firmly. "But the physical operations manual is in the basement archives. Box 4 labeled 2012. Better start digging. That $25,000. Zeros in presentation is tomorrow, right?" I hung up. There was no manual in Box 4, just broken cables. But sending him on a wild goose chase bought me the critical time I needed. Thursday morning was approaching, and my dead man's switch was silently ticking down. Thursday morning dawned gray and overcast, a fitting backdrop for a massive corporate disaster. I woke up at 5 a.m., completely unable to sleep. Today was the big day. I drove to the greasy diner directly across the street from the Titan Industrial Systems office building. I sat alone in a quiet booth by the front window, ordered black coffee and scrambled eggs, and watched the building. At 7 a.m., the expensive catering trucks arrived, unloading platters of overpriced sandwiches and premium coffee. Martin was clearly sparing no expense to impress the clients. At 7:30 a.m., Julian's flashy Porsche aggressively pulled into the VIP lot. He drove too fast, nearly clipping the curb, looking disheveled and panicked. At 8 a.m., sleek black SUVs arrived, carrying the Apex Automotive executive team. 4 older men in dark suits stepped out, expecting perfection. Martin met them at the door, eagerly shaking hands and laughing too loudly. I calmly checked my wristwatch. 8:15 a.m., my official HR termination had been processed at exactly 9:15 a.m. on Monday. That meant 72 hours from that moment would be exactly 9:15 a.m. today. The massive 25 million thousand presentation was scheduled to start at 9 a.m. The first 15 minutes would be filled with boring introductions and corporate pleasantries. Right around 9:15, Julian would be expected to confidently fire up the main system for the live technical demonstration. The exact timing was beautifully poetic. I slowly sipped my hot coffee. My phone sat completely silent on the table. At 8:45 a.m., I saw movement in the second-floor conference room window. They were gathering. I could imagine Martin beaming with fake confidence, Julian sweating through his shirt, and the Apex executives waiting impatiently. 9 a.m. Showtime. At 9:10 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text from Gary. They are starting now. Julian looks like he is going to physically throw up on the mahogany table. He couldn't find the basement manual. He is just blindly winging it. 9:14 a.m. I stared intensely at the tiny second hand sweeping across my watch. Tick, 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 9:15 a.m. Somewhere deep in the cool, dark server room, a dormant security script suddenly woke up. It rapidly pinged the main HR database. It checked the employment status of user ID H. Avens. Status, terminated. It checked for a manual override command from the physical root console, none found. It immediately initiated Protocol 0. At 9:17 a.m., my phone began to ring loudly. The caller ID flashed brightly, Martin Vance. I stared blankly at the screen. I let it ring. 1, 2, 3, 4. It went straight to voicemail. I calmly took a deliberate bite of my cold toast. At 9:19 a.m., it rang aggressively again. Martin Vance. I finally answered it this time, my voice flat. "Hello, Henry," I said smoothly. "Henry, thank God." Martin's voice was a high-pitched, terrified screech. "You need to help us right now. The main system has gone completely crazy." "Martin?" I asked, feigning deep confusion. "Why are you calling me? I thought I was transitioned out for a more agile perspective." "Just shut up and listen," he yelled hysterically. "We are in the absolute middle of the biggest demo in company history." Julian tried to launch the live simulation and the entire wall screen went blood red. It says, "Administrative lockdown. Nothing works. The corporate email is down. The VoIP phones are dead. The main manufacturing line just came to a grinding halt. The Apex guys are just staring at us." "That sounds exactly like a standard security protocol," so I said calmly, taking another slow sip of my coffee. "Did someone trigger an unauthorized access event?" "I don't know. Julian is frantically clicking absolutely everything. The admin 123 password isn't working at all." "Well, Martin, if the primary administrative account is terminated, the system automatically locks down to prevent hostile hacking," I explained patiently. "It is a core safety feature I built in 2019. "I don't care what you built," Martin screamed. "Just fix it. Turn it off. I absolutely cannot do that." "Martin," I said, "I am not a Titan employee anymore. Furthermore, this situation is a massive legal liability. Putting an unqualified 28-year-old with absolutely no technical background in charge of a $25,000 Zeusen contract is a blatant breach of fiduciary duty. If the shareholders found out you blew this massive deal due to nepotism, they would legally crucify you for dissipation of corporate assets. Plus, my abrupt firing violated the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. Ask Julian to unlock it." There was a stunned silence. I heard an Apex executive in the background. "Mr. Vance, if you cannot even run a simple presentation, how can we trust you with our production line? This is amateur hour." Martin's voice trembled. "Henry, please, just name your price." I smiled a dark, completely satisfied smile. "I am a private, independent IT consultant now, Martin. My emergency rate for critical system recovery is $450 an hour. I require a minimum of 8 hours, paid immediately in full, and I need a signed consulting agreement explicitly indemnifying me." $450? Henry, that is complete extortion. "That is the exact market rate for expert, institutional knowledge," I stated firmly. "You can pay it right now. Or you can spend the next hour trying to explain to Apex Automotive why they just wasted their morning." "Fine," he shouted desperately. "Fine, just get over here right now. I will agree to the terms. I am sitting across the street," I said quietly. "I will be there in exactly 5 minutes. Have the paperwork ready." I hung up, finished my coffee, left a $20 tip, and walked out. I confidently strode into the chaotic conference room. Julian was physically hunched over the main keyboard, frantically typing at random, his expensive silk tie totally loosened, and his normally perfect hair an absolute sweaty mess. Martin was standing completely frozen by the large window, looking as pale as a ghost. The four apex executives, led by the imposing Dennis Bradley, were sitting rigidly at the large mahogany table, their arms crossed tightly, looking utterly furious. "Ah, the cavalry has finally arrived," Dennis said, looking directly at me with a mix of relief and intense curiosity. "You must be the legacy guy." "Henry Evans," I said firmly, extending my right hand to him. "Senior systems architect and independent IT consultant." I then turned my gaze to the sweating 28-year-old at the console. "Move over, Julian. The adults are actually talking now." Julian instantly scrambled out of the expensive leather chair, like it was literally on fire. I calmly sat down. The massive projection screen was a solid wall of terrifying red text blinking, "Systems locked down. Rot. Off fin Rakeel." I quickly opened the raw command line terminal, the black and green box that Julian absolutely despised because it did not look like a shiny smartphone app. My fingers flew across the mechanical keys with pure muscle memory. I typed in the highly complex string of administrative override code, culminating with my 64-character mental key that I had memorized perfectly. The terrifying red screen instantly flickered. It turned a beautiful, calm green. The emergency lights in the room seemed to brighten, the massive projector hummed back to life. The complex simulation software loaded instantly. "System fully restored," I said, spinning the leather chair around to face the silent room. "Are you gentlemen ready for your technical demo?" The entire room was completely silent. Martin looked like he had just witnessed a genuine miracle. Julian looked like he desperately wanted to dissolve into the carpet. Dennis Bradley looked slowly from Julian to me, and then finally to Martin. "Let me get this absolutely straight," Dennis said, his voice dripping with pure ice. "You fired the only guy who actually knows how to turn the lights on, replaced him with this kid," he gestured dismissively at Julian, "and then had to frantically hire the very first guy back at 5 times his original price just to save your own massive presentation." Martin opened his mouth to formulate an excuse, but absolutely no sound came out. "That is exactly about the size of it," I said cheerfully. "Shall we proceed with the manufacturing integration demo? I can personally walk you through the complex architecture since I actually designed every single line of it." Dennis smiled warmly at me. "Please do, Henry," Dennis said. "We are all ears." The heavy air in the conference room had completely changed. 5 minutes ago, it had been heavily filled with the putrid stench of absolute failure and sheer corporate panic. Now it was deeply charged with the cold, hard, reassuring clarity of actual technical competence. I deliberately stood at the very head of the table, exactly where Julian had been helplessly standing. I simply took the remote clicker from the polished table where Julian had dropped it. As I was saying before the minor interruption, I began, my voice perfectly level. "The Titan Industrial Integration Architecture is fundamentally built on a highly customized hybrid edge model. We absolutely do not rely solely on the public cloud for real-time manufacturing data because, as you gentlemen certainly know, network latency literally kills production lines." Dennis leaned forward with intense interest. "Exactly. That was my primary concern when the previous presenter vaguely mentioned moving our critical PLC controllers to a generic Azure instance." I glanced briefly at Julian. He was slumped deeply in a chair against the far wall. Martin was sitting right next to him, his face a tight mask of frozen horror. He knew perfectly well he could not stop me. Moving critical PLCs to the cloud is a dangerous buzzword strategy, not a legitimate engineering one, I explained patiently, clicking to the next slide. If your internet connection drops for even 50 milliseconds, your robotic assembly arms completely desynchronize. You do not just lose data, you lose physical product. And you violently break expensive machines. That is precisely why I explicitly designed a localized edge computing layer. It physically processes the heavy logic locally, on-site, in absolute real-time. It only sends the highly aggregated results to the cloud for later analytics. It works perfectly whether the outside internet is fully up or totally down. "And what about the underlying security?" asked another executive named Peterson. "We were clearly told by Mr. Vance that the system heavily uses advanced blockchain encryption." I genuinely could not help it. A small, genuine chuckle escaped my lips. "Blockchain is just a decentralized ledger system, Mr. Peterson. It is certainly not a magic digital shield." What we actually use is a strictly enforced, multi-layered VLAN structure, combined with completely air-gapped offline backups for all critical control systems. It is incredibly boring, and it is completely unhackable from the outside internet because the critical manufacturing components are literally not even physically connected to the internet. Peterson nodded slowly. Boring is exceptionally good. We really like boring. Boring consistently makes us money. For the next 90 solid minutes, I completely owned that room. I slowly walked them through the rigid disaster recovery protocols, the dynamic load balancing, and the automated redundancy failovers. Julian desperately tried to speak exactly one time, about 40 minutes into the presentation. "I think what Henry is trying to say," Julian interrupted, his voice cracking noticeably, "is that we can rapidly leverage the synergy of the—" "Sit down and be quiet, Julian," Dennis Bradley commanded sharply, not even looking at him. "The adults are talking about real engineering." Julian turned a bright shade of deep red and sank back into his chair. The absolute humiliation was not loud. It was quiet, highly professional, and utterly absolute. It was the complete dismantling of the incredibly foolish idea that a tailored suit and a shiny MBA could effortlessly replace decades of real IT experience. The 2-hour presentation ended smoothly with a slide clearly showing our flawless uptime statistics. 99.98% over the last 5 solid years. "Are there any final questions regarding the system architecture?" I asked confidently, slowly clicking the main projection screen to solid black. Dennis Bradley stood up slowly from the table, methodically buttoning his tailored suit jacket. He looked intensely at Martin, then turned his sharp gaze back to me. "I actually have one very critical question," Dennis said. "Who exactly is personally leading the implementation of this complex system if we decide to proceed? Because frankly, Martin, your new director of IT just spent the last 2 hours definitively proving that he does not understand a single thing about the product you are trying to sell." The entire room instantly went dead silent once again. This was the ultimate ultimatum. Martin desperately scrambled to his feet. "Well, Dennis, obviously we are currently in a slight transition period and I absolutely do not care about your internal transition." Dennis snapped aggressively, cutting him off. "I deeply care about my 25,000. I am not handing the valuable keys to my primary factory to a 28-year-old kid who sincerely thinks the cloud is a legitimate manufacturing strategy. We completely walk right now unless we have a rock-solid, legally binding guarantee of total technical competence." Martin looked over at me. His eyes were openly pleading, desperately begging me to somehow save him. I looked straight at Dennis. "I can definitively guarantee the architecture, Mr. Bradley, because I built every line of it. But as for the physical implementation, I intentionally paused. I am strictly an independent IT consultant. My legal contract with Titan Industrial Systems ends the exact moment I walk out of this conference room today." Dennis nodded very slowly, completely understanding the power dynamic. He reached deliberately into his jacket pocket, pulled out a heavy business card, and slid it smoothly across the mahogany table directly toward me. "Then we certainly have a lot of things to think about," Dennis said quietly. "Thank you very much for the excellent demonstration, Henry." The entire Apex executive team packed up their briefcases and left the room. They deliberately did not shake Martin's hand or look at Julian. When the heavy door clicked shut, the suffocating silence followed was heavy enough to crush a grown man. Martin turned slowly to me. The frantic panic was gone, replaced by a sad, defeated slump. "Do you fully realize what you just did?" Martin whispered hoarsely. "You just completely cost us the biggest contract in company history." "No, Martin," I said calmly, carefully packing up my personal laptop. "I just expertly showed them the absolute truth. You arrogantly tried to sell them a high-performance Ferrari with a broken lawnmower engine. I simply opened up the hood so they could see inside." "I fully paid you," Julian suddenly shouted. "We paid you exactly $450 an hour. You were explicitly supposed to help us win the deal." I looked at the foolish kid. "I did absolutely help you, Julian," I said calmly. "I completely fixed the critical system you broke. I flawlessly gave the technical presentation you could not possibly give. And I literally saved you from being aggressively sued for massive federal fraud when you inevitably crashed their entire production line." I turned my attention fully back to Martin. My final invoice will definitely be in your email inbox by the end of the day. Exactly 8 hours minimum, plus the emergency call-out fee. That is exactly $3,600. I firmly expect immediate payment within 24 hours. I started casually walking toward the door. Wait, Martin said weakly. I slowly turned around. Martin was leaning heavily against the table. He knew the truth. The 72-hour dead man's switch was deactivated, but the massive system still desperately required highly skilled daily maintenance. Julian absolutely could not do any of it. We desperately need to talk, Martin said. We held a brutal, one-sided negotiation right there in the conference room. I desperately want you back, Martin pleaded. We can legally rescind the recent termination, fully reinstate your seniority, maybe even give you a small raise. Say, exactly $90,000 a year. I laughed loudly right in his face. Martin, you genuinely do not get it, I said. I absolutely do not want to work for you. I do not ever want to be an employee again. Then what exactly do you want, he asked, completely defeated. I specifically want a consulting retainer, I said. 1. I work exactly 20 hours a week maximum, 100% remote. 2. I answer to absolutely no one but the CEO. Julian is legally forbidden from touching any admin-level systems without my direct written approval. 3. My new hourly rate is exactly $150 an hour. Martin's eyes bulged noticeably. 150? That is over 150 grand a year for literally half the work. Actually, it is exactly $156,000, I quickly corrected him. And you save massively on employee benefits. And if I say no, then I simply walk. And tomorrow morning, when the critical overnight batch processing inevitably fails, you can confidently ask Julian to fix it for you. Martin looked at his son, then at the checkbook in his mind. Fine, Martin spat bitterly. Done. I walked out of that building at exactly 2 p.m. with a legally binding signed letter of intent. The next 6 months were genuinely the best of my entire professional life. I legally formed my own LLC, Evans Systems Integration. Julian was quietly moved to become the new director of digital marketing, where he could not crash a critical server farm. But the real victory did not come from Titan. Exactly 2 weeks after the epic presentation disaster, my phone unexpectedly rang. Henry, this is Dennis Bradley. Hello, Dennis. We officially decided not to move forward with the Titan contract. However, we still have a massive factory to successfully automate, and we were incredibly impressed with your specific architecture. We are actively looking for a completely independent consultant to personally oversee the massive implementation. We have budgeted exactly $800, zeros in for the lead consultant role. Would you be interested? I smiled. $800,000 plus the solid retainer from Titan. I was looking at clearing over $1 million. My retirement date wasn't 7 years away at age 55 anymore. It was whenever I completely wanted it to be. They had arrogantly tried to violently throw me away, but they had completely forgotten the one fundamental rule of technology. Hardware is cheap, software is easily replicable, but real, hard-earned experience is the only thing you absolutely cannot download. I felt a profound sense of vindication, knowing that all the years of sacrifice, the long nights, and the unwavering dedication had finally been recognized by those who truly mattered. The corporate world might be ruthless, but sometimes raw talent and irrefutable technical expertise still manage to win in the end.